January 14, 1984, San Diego, California. The winter sun filtered through the palm trees surrounding a sprawling Spanish Colonial Revival estate perched on a bluff overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Inside the master bedroom of the mansion at 6963 La Jolla Boulevard, an 81-year-old man lay in bed, his body ravaged by heart failure and stroke. Ray Kroc, the man who had transformed a single hamburger stand into the largest restaurant empire in human history, was dying. The room was quiet except for the rhythmic beeping of medical equipment and the distant crash of waves against the shore below. His third wife, Joan, sat beside him, holding a hand that had once signed franchise agreements across America, that had shaken hands with presidents and paupers alike, that had built McDonald's into a global phenomenon. But the house around them held secrets that few people knew. This was not just the home of a successful businessman. It was a fortress of ambition built by a man who had spent his entire life chasing success, only to find it at age 52, when most men were contemplating retirement. The walls had witnessed bitter divorces, ruthless business decisions, and the transformation of American food culture itself. When Ray Kroc took his final breath that January afternoon, he left behind more than a fast food empire worth billions. He left behind this mansion, a monument to what can happen when desperation, timing, and absolute determination collide. But to understand why this house mattered, why it became the command center for a revolution in American eating, and what darkness lived within its walls, we must travel back further still. Not to California, but to the cold streets of Chicago, where a boy learned that survival meant never ever giving up, no matter how many times the world told him no. Chapter 2. A Boy Without a Future. October 5th, 1902. Oak Park, Illinois. A child entered the world in a modest wooden house on the western edge of Chicago, born to parents who had little money and even less hope of climbing higher. His name was Raymond Albert Kroc, and from his first breath, he was ordinary. His father, Louis Kroc, was a failed real estate speculator who worked as a Western Union telegraph operator, punching keys for pennies while watching wealthier men build fortunes around him. His mother, Rose, took in sewing to make ends meet, her fingers worn raw from threading needles by lamplight. The Kroc family lived in a neighborhood filled with immigrants and strivers, people who spoke with accents and worked with their hands. Oak Park was respectable enough, but it was not wealthy. Young Ray grew up watching his father's bitterness ferment like spoiled milk, listening to lectures about missed opportunities and the cruelty of fate. Louis Kroc had tried business ventures that collapsed. He had invested in schemes that vanished overnight. And he carried that failure like a weight around his neck, a constant reminder that some men were simply not meant to succeed. Ray absorbed these lessons in reverse. He learned that doing what his father did meant poverty and regret. He learned that safety was a trap, that caution was the enemy, that the only way forward was through relentless, almost insane persistence. By age 15, Ray had dropped out of high school. He lied about his age and joined the Red Cross as an ambulance driver trainee, hoping to serve in World War I. He trained alongside another young man named Walt Disney, both of them dreamers, desperate to escape the ordinary lives waiting for them back home. But the war ended before Ray could ship overseas, and he returned to Chicago with nothing to show for his ambition but a certificate and a hunger that would never be satisfied.
Chapter 3. 30 Years of Failure. The 1920s arrived with jazz music and stock market euphoria, but for Ray Kroc, they brought only a grinding succession of disappointments. He worked as a piano player in nightclubs and speakeasies, pounding keys for drunken crowds who barely noticed him. He sold paper cups for the Lily Tulip Cup Company, knocking on doors and pitching disposable containers to skeptical restaurant owners. He married his first wife, Ethel Fleming, in 1922, a union that would slowly corrode under the pressure of his endless absences and obsessive work habits. Their daughter Marilyn was born in 1924, but fatherhood did not soften Ray's desperation. If anything, it sharpened it. He had a family to support now, another mouth to feed, another reason why failure was not an option. Throughout the 1930s, while America sank into the Great Depression, Ray scrambled from job to job. He worked in Florida real estate during the doomed land boom, watching fortunes evaporate overnight. He played piano for radio stations, his fingers flying across keys for audiences he could not see. He sold everything from ribbon to real estate, always chasing the next opportunity, always believing that success was just around the corner. Then in 1939, he discovered something that would occupy the next 15 years of his life. A device called the multimixer, a machine that could blend 5 milkshakes simultaneously. Ray became the exclusive distributor, traveling across America's highways, visiting diners and drive-ins, demonstrating his machine to owners who were mostly unimpressed. The work was brutal. He drove thousands of miles, slept in cheap motels, ate greasy food in roadside diners, and returned home to a wife who barely recognized him anymore. His marriage to Ethel was dying slowly, kept alive only by habit and his Catholic guilt about divorce. By 1954, Ray Kroc was 52 years old. He had arthritis, diabetes, and no real money to speak of. Most men his age were counting down to retirement, accepting that their peak had passed. But Ray Kroc was about to receive a phone call that would change everything.
Chapter 4: The Phone Call That Changed America. Summer 1954. Ray Kroc sat in his small office in suburban Chicago reviewing sales reports that offered no comfort. The multi-mixer business was dying. Blenders and single-spindle machines were replacing his bulky device, and his commission checks were shrinking month by month. Then his secretary handed him an order form that made no sense. A small restaurant in San Bernardino, California, had purchased 8 multi-mixers. 8! Most restaurants bought 1, maybe 2. What kind of operation needed to make 40 milkshakes simultaneously? The restaurant was called McDonald's, operated by 2 brothers named Dick and Mac. Ray had never heard of them, but the order was too strange to ignore. He decided to visit California and see this operation for himself. When Ray Kroc pulled into the parking lot at 1398 North E Street in San Bernardino on a hot afternoon, what he saw stopped him cold. A small octagonal building with red and white tile work, gleaming golden arches rising from either side. But it was not the architecture that shocked him, it was the line. Dozens of people waited patiently for hamburgers that cost 15 cents, orders that appeared in paper bags within seconds. No waitresses, no dishes, no delay. Ray watched as the brothers operated their kitchen with assembly line precision. Each worker had one job: grilling patties, dressing buns, wrapping burgers, filling drinks. The food was simple, consistent, and fast. The McDonald brothers had stripped away everything complicated about running a restaurant and created something revolutionary. Ray Kroc saw the future in that moment, not just a successful restaurant, but a system that could be replicated infinitely. He approached Dick and Mac McDonald with a proposal. Let him franchise their concept across America. He would find locations, recruit operators, and ensure quality control. They would receive a small percentage of sales. The brothers were skeptical. They had tried franchising before with disappointing results, but Ray Kroc possessed something they did not: absolute maniacal determination. On March 2nd, 1955, Ray Kroc signed a franchise agreement with the McDonald brothers that gave him rights to open restaurants under their name. He was 52 years old, diabetic, arthritic, and nearly broke. Most people would have called it a foolish gamble. Ray called it his last chance.
Chapter 5: The Empire Begins. April 15th, 1955, Des Plaines, Illinois. Ray Kroc stood in an empty lot at the corner of Lee Street and North Virginia, watching construction crews pour concrete for what would become the first McDonald's franchise under his control. He had mortgaged everything, borrowed from friends, and maxed out every credit line he could find. At 52, he was betting his entire future on 15-cent hamburgers. The building rose quickly, a near-exact replica of the San Bernardino original. Red and white tiles, golden arches, a kitchen designed for speed and consistency. Ray obsessed over every detail, from the exact temperature of the French fry oil to the precise weight of each hamburger patty. He was not just opening a restaurant, he was building a machine. Opening day arrived with chaos. The ice cream mix was wrong, the shakes came out soupy and thin, the French fries were limp and greasy because the oil temperature was inconsistent. Ray stood behind the counter, sweating through his shirt, watching his dream threaten to collapse before it even began. But he adjusted, corrected, and pushed forward. Within weeks, the Des Plaines McDonald's was selling hundreds of hamburgers per day. Ray began recruiting franchisees with evangelical fervor. He did not want passive investors who would hire managers and collect checks. He wanted owner-operators, people who would work the grill themselves, who would maintain his standards because their own livelihoods depended on it. By 1956, Ray had opened a dozen locations. By 1958, the chain had sold its 100th millionth hamburger. The red and white buildings were spreading across America like wildfire, each one generating revenue that flowed back to Ray's company, McDonald's System, Inc. But success brought conflict. The McDonald brothers watched from California as Ray Kroc transformed their simple restaurant into a national phenomenon. They received their contractual percentage, but it was pennies compared to the fortune Ray was building. Arguments began over quality control, expansion speed, and who truly owned the concept. Ray chafed under their restrictions. He wanted to move faster, take bigger risks, make changes they would never approve. The brothers represented everything Ray despised: caution, hesitation, satisfaction with modest success. By 1961, the relationship had become unbearable. Ray Kroc made a decision that would define his legacy as either a visionary or a thief, depending on who told the story.
Chapter 6: The Buyout and the Betrayal. February 1961. Ray Kroc walked into a meeting with Dick and Mac McDonald carrying a proposal that would settle their conflict once and for all. He wanted to buy them out completely, to purchase every right to the McDonald's name, the golden arches, the entire concept. The brothers were tired of fighting, tired of watching Ray ignore their objections. They agreed to sell for $2.7 million, roughly $27 million in today's currency. It seemed like a fortune to two small-town restaurateurs who had started with nothing. Ray arranged the financing through investors and signed the papers. McDonald's belonged to him now, completely and forever. But there was a problem that would haunt the brothers for the rest of their lives. Their original handshake agreement with Ray had included a promise. They would receive 1% of annual profits in perpetuity. That handshake was not in the written buyout contract. Ray's lawyers had structured the deal so that the $2.7 million purchase price eliminated all future obligations. Dick and Mac McDonald discovered too late that they had sold away not just their restaurant, but their legacy and their ongoing income. They were furious, but legally powerless. There was worse to come. The brothers still owned and operated their original San Bernardino location. Ray Kroc, now the sole owner of the McDonald's brand, opened a new McDonald's franchise just one block from their restaurant. He undercut their prices and used the full weight of his growing empire to destroy their business. Within a year, the original McDonald's, the restaurant that had started everything, was struggling to survive. Dick and Mac were forced to remove the golden arches and rename their restaurant the Big M. It eventually closed in 1972, erased from history as thoroughly as if it had never existed. Ray Kroc never apologized. In interviews, he would later claim that he had not stolen anything, that he had built McDonald's through his own vision and work, that the brothers had been lucky to receive what they got. The controversy would follow him for decades, a dark stain on an otherwise triumphant story. But by 1961, Ray Kroc had more pressing concerns than the feelings of two men he had left behind. He had an empire to build, and he needed a palace from which to rule it. His eyes turned westward, toward California and the glittering ocean, toward a life he had spent 59 years dreaming about.
Chapter 7. The California Palace. 1965. La Jolla, California. Ray Kroc purchased a spectacular estate perched on a bluff at 6963 La Jolla Boulevard, overlooking the Pacific Ocean. The property sprawled across manicured grounds, a Spanish Colonial Revival masterpiece with white stucco walls, red tile roofing, and arched windows that captured the endless California sunlight. It was everything Ray had never had as a child: space, beauty, status, and the unmistakable aroma of wealth. The mansion featured multiple wings, each designed for specific purposes. The main residence contained formal living areas with cathedral ceilings, exposed wooden beams, and hand-painted tiles imported from Mexico. The master suite opened onto a private terrace where Ray could watch the sunset paint the ocean gold and crimson. There were guest quarters for visitors, a separate wing for staff who maintained the grounds and served meals, and an office where Ray continued to manage McDonald's operations even as the company went public and made him one of the wealthiest men in America. But the estate's crown jewel was not visible from the main house. Behind the mansion, carved into the hillside, Ray built an entertainment complex that rivaled anything in Hollywood. A swimming pool stretched 40 feet, surrounded by cabanas and lounging areas. A tennis court sat nestled between palm trees, its surface immaculate, and rarely used because Ray's arthritis had progressed too far for him to play. And there was the feature that revealed Ray's deepest passion: a full-sized baseball diamond, complete with dugouts, professional lighting, and seating for spectators. Ray Kroc loved baseball with an obsession that bordered on mania. He had purchased the San Diego Padres in 1974, pouring millions into a struggling franchise because he believed baseball was the purest expression of American spirit. At his estate, he would host games for friends, employees, and local youth teams, standing in the dugout with a hot dog in one hand and a Coca-Cola in the other, living out childhood fantasies that poverty had once denied him. The estate became his sanctuary from the corporate battles that consumed McDonald's. Board meetings happened in Chicago, stockholder conferences in New York, but La Jolla was where Ray Kroc could be himself. Or at least the version of himself he wanted the world to see. Because inside those beautiful walls, darkness was gathering. His first marriage had finally ended in divorce. His relationship with his daughter Marilyn was strained and distant, and he had fallen in love with a woman he could not have. Chapter 8. The Forbidden Love. 1969. Inside the La Jolla mansion, Ray Kroc was trapped in a marriage that had died years before. His second wife, Jane Dobbins Green, had seemed like a fresh start when they married in 1963, but the relationship had soured quickly. Jane was refined, cultured, and utterly incompatible with a man who worked 18-hour days and measured success in hamburgers sold. They lived in the same beautiful house, but occupied different worlds. Then Ray met Joan Beverly Smith, the wife of one of his earliest and most successful franchisees, Raleigh Smith. Joan was elegant, sophisticated, and shared Ray's passion for music and philanthropy. She played the organ beautifully, filling rooms with melodies that seemed to calm Ray's restless spirit. Their attraction was immediate and dangerous. Both were married. Both were prominent in the McDonald's family of franchisees and executives. An affair would scandalize the company and destroy reputations. But Ray Kroc had never let consequences stop him before. The affair began quietly, hidden behind business meetings and charity events. Ray would visit Joan under the pretense of discussing franchise matters with Raleigh. They would meet in hotels, in borrowed homes, anywhere they could steal moments together. The guilt ate at both of them. Joan was a devout Catholic, tormented by the sin she was committing. Ray had spent his entire life fighting for success, only to discover that success could not fill the loneliness that had always lived inside him. In 1968, Ray divorced Jane Dobbins Green, a quiet separation that cost him millions in settlement, but freed him from the pretense of a marriage that had never worked. Joan remained married to Raleigh, trapped by faith and social obligation. The affair continued for years, a wound that would not heal. Ray would sit alone in the La Jolla mansion, staring at the ocean, nursing drinks that his doctors had forbidden, wondering how a man who had everything could feel so empty. Finally, in 1969, Joan made her choice. She divorced Raleigh Smith, enduring the shame and judgment that came with abandoning a marriage for another man. Ray divorced his second wife that same year. On March 8, 1969, Ray Kroc and Joan Smith were married in a small, private ceremony. No corporate celebration, no media announcement, just two people in their 60s who had destroyed other lives to be together. They moved into the La Jolla estate as husband and wife, trying to build something honest from the rubble of their betrayals. For the first time in his life, Ray Kroc seemed genuinely happy, but his body was failing.
Chapter 9. The Crumbling Fortress. 1970s. The La Jolla mansion that had once symbolized triumph was becoming a gilded prison. Ray's health deteriorated with each passing year. Diabetes ravaged his circulatory system, arthritis turned his joints into sources of constant agony, and his heart grew weaker despite the best medical care money could buy. He had suffered a stroke in 1980 that left him partially paralyzed, confined to a wheelchair in the very house where he had once hosted legendary parties. Joan became his nurse, companion, and anchor to reality. She converted portions of the mansion into a medical facility, with hospital equipment hidden behind elegant screens and nurses on call 24 hours a day. The baseball field outside fell silent, the grass growing wild because Ray could no longer supervise its maintenance. The tennis court cracked and faded. The swimming pool, once filled with laughing guests, sat empty except for leaves that drifted down from the palms. But even as his body failed, Ray's mind remained sharp and his control over McDonald's absolute. He conducted business from his bedroom, signing documents, reviewing reports, and making decisions that affected thousands of restaurants worldwide. He was worth over $500 million, but that wealth felt meaningless as he lay in bed, unable to walk, unable to escape the pain that had become his constant companion. The mansion witnessed his rages during those final years. Ray would scream at nurses who moved too slowly, at executives who disappointed him, at his own failing body that refused to obey his will. The man who had built an empire through sheer force of personality was discovering that willpower could not stop death. Joan absorbed his anger with grace, understanding that beneath the fury was terror. Ray Kroc was facing the one opponent he could not intimidate, could not outwork, could not buy his way past. His daughter Marilyn visited occasionally, their relationship still strained by decades of his absence and obsession with work. His grandchildren barely knew him. The empire he had built would continue without him, managed by executives who had never sold a multi-mixer or scraped together rent money. In December 1983, Ray suffered a massive stroke that left him unable to speak. He lingered through Christmas and into the new year, trapped inside a body that had become his enemy. The ocean outside his window continued its eternal rhythm, waves crashing against rocks that had stood for millennia, indifferent to human ambition. On January 14, 1984, in the master bedroom of his La Jolla estate, Ray Kroc surrendered to the inevitable. He was 81 years old. Chapter 10. The Legacy and the Mansion's Fate. The funeral was held at El Camino Memorial Park in San Diego, a modest ceremony that belied the magnitude of what Ray Kroc had accomplished. Executives from McDonald's corporate headquarters flew in from Chicago. Franchisees who had built fortunes from his system came to pay respects, but the most notable absence was any representative from the McDonald brothers family. Dick McDonald had died in 1971, Mac in 1998, both men having watched from obscurity as Ray Kroc claimed sole credit for creating McDonald's. The estate Ray left behind was staggering. Joan inherited the La Jolla mansion and the bulk of his fortune, estimated at $600 million. She would live in the house for another 19 years, maintaining it exactly as Ray had left it, as if preserving his presence could somehow keep him close. She donated billions to charity, funding everything from Ronald McDonald Houses to NPR, distributing the wealth that Ray had accumulated through relentless ambition. The mansion itself became a monument to a complex legacy. This was the house where the man who changed American eating habits had lived and died, where business decisions affecting millions of workers were made over breakfast, where a forbidden love affair had finally found legitimacy, where success and loneliness had coexisted in equal measure. Today, visitors to La Jolla and still see the property from the street, though it remains privately owned and carefully guarded. The baseball field is gone, replaced by manicured gardens. The entertainment complex has been modified, but the main house stands much as it did when Ray first purchased it in 1965. What do you think about Ray Kroc's story? Was he a visionary who democratized dining and created opportunities for thousands of franchisees? Or was he a ruthless operator who stole credit from the true inventors? Comment below with your thoughts. The truth, like most truths about complicated men, probably lies somewhere in between. Ray Kroc did not invent McDonald's, but without him, it would have remained a single restaurant in San Bernardino. He was a man who failed for 50 years before succeeding beyond imagination, who destroyed relationships in pursuit of achievement, who built an empire from 15-cent hamburgers and died alone despite being surrounded by wealth. The mansion at 6963 La Jolla Boulevard stands as testament to what ambition can build and what it costs to build it. Behind those beautiful Spanish colonial walls, Ray Kroc proved that the American dream was real, and that sometimes achieving it feels more like a curse than a blessing.